Great.
Okay, well, this is a happy occasion.
It is a happy
This
occasion.
this is one of the rare times. Well, I don't know if it's rare times where we can say we have a real triumph in the fibromyalgia field, and that is that the FDA has recently approved after a uh, 15 years 15 years before the last fibromyalgia drug was approved. They actually approved a drug for fibromyalgia. It's been a long, dry spell. And I'm talking to Seth Lederman. Is that how you say your name?
Letterman.
Lederman.
Yep.
Okay. Uh, the leader of Tonix, which brought the drug Tomnya to market, uh,
Tonmya.
Tonmya.
The accent on the second syllable. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's better. That's
Yeah.
better. Yes, I like
Yeah.
that. I like that.
Yeah.
Tonmya to market. And it has really been a long and really quite a journey for Tonix, a small drug company that is able to bring a new fibromyalgia drug to market. I believe, the last three fibromyalgia drugs were I believe they were created by large drug companies. Is that correct?
Yes. Lyrica was developed by Pfizer, and that was approved in 2007. Um, Cymbalta was developed by Lilly, and that was approved in 2008. And the third one, Savella, Savella, was actually originally developed by Cypress Pharmaceuticals, but then they did a large partnership with Forest Labs, which at the time was a medium-sized company. And through a series of M&A deals, Savella is now owned by AbbVie, which is a big company.
Got it. Got it. So on Health Rising, we've been covering the tonics. Believe it was TNX 102 for quite a while. Saga for at least 5 years. So when did you start developing it? I want to kind of illuminate just how long it takes a drug to come to market. And this isn't really it's a new drug, but it's a formulation of an old drug. So it's not a brand spanking. I guess it's not a brand spanking new compound, although uh, I don't know how the FDA deals with those. But anyway, when did this whole saga start for
Sure. Well,
Tonix?
there were a couple of things you said I just want to quickly respond to, and then we can go off on.
Hmm.
First, you said it has been more than 15 years, but that's not because FDA is difficult to deal with. FDA wants more drugs for fibromyalgia. FDA, the pain division at FDA, has been a pleasure to work with. They
Yeah.
they want to advance more drugs for fibromyalgia. They fully adopted that patients are in the center of drug development. And I think the challenge is not been on FDA side. It's been more our companies sponsoring new drugs and bringing forth the requisite data that you need to get a drug approved. So the first, so
Good.
I,
That's good
I'm
to
I'm
hear.
delighted to be the first, but I certainly hope there are more. And I would count it. I I I won't. I will accept the word triumph, but it would be a real triumph if this also kicks in a new era of
Mhm.
development of new drugs for fibromyalgia. So, why did it take so long? Well, first of all, our story goes back to 1975 when I was
Oh,
still in college. But Harvey Moldofsky was a psychiatrist in Toronto. And in 1975, he began talking about non-restorative sleep in fibromyalgia. And for me, that was a landmark paper. In 1976, he came out with a more controversial paper in which he kept waking up undergraduates and kind of induced a mild form of fibromyalgia, leading towards the idea that that non-restorative sleep might be causative of fibromyalgia. And in the 1975 paper, he makes the audacious proposal that fibromyalgia should be considered a syndrome of non-restorative sleep. And I mentioned so much about Harvey. He was the founding member of our scientific advisory board. Our drug design and concept is all based on his work. And in a sad irony, we got FDA approval on August 15th, which was a week ago, last Friday. And I emailed Harvey, didn't hear back. And then I looked in the paper and I just noticed yesterday that Harvey Moldofsky passed away on August 15th.
Oh my God.
So I'm
Wow.
looking forward to interacting with his family to learn whether or not he knew about our approval, because there was no bigger um, cheerleader for us and visionary
Mm.
than Harvey. So it was quite ironic. I certainly hope that he knew. Um, but but
As I remember, it did not take long to increase of poor sleep to increase pain sensitivity in the not long at all in healthy people.
yes,
Yes, yeah.
except for there was one athlete in the study, and he interpreted it correctly because, exercise, in a interdisciplinary approach, exercise is, I believe, very important,
Yeah.
but it's also, I believe it can be prophylactic, and it was I believe it was a cross country runner in that sample who was resistant to developing pain.
Oh, no
So,
kidding. No
so
kidding.
Harvey, he had this genius of interpretation. He was a real doctor, and I say that in a way where I had the utmost respect for him. He was the consummate doctor. Um, but anyway, but you're right. He really that was a beautiful paper. I don't think it's widely accepted that non-restorative sleep can cause fibromyalgia, but I do think that I believe that evidence is now that there are many paths to fibromyalgia.
Hmm, hmm,
Um, one that's gaining a lot of attention now is variously called, IACI, infection-associated chronic illness.
hmm, hmm,
That's getting a lot of traction. I like the conception that fibromyalgia is one of the COPCs, chronic overlapping pain conditions,
hmm.
which is another conception. I
A
we
nociplastic, mostly plastic,
and we
nociplastic. Uh-huh.
subscribe to the idea, and it's been said by several authors that fibromyalgia is the prototypic nociplastic syndrome.
Yes.
Particularly primary fibromyalgia, where there are no other reasons to have the syndrome, seems to be a pure nociplastic. But you asked many things. Why did it take Tonix so long? Well, there's several challenges to developing a drug for fibromyalgia. First is we were doing a first-in-class drug. There, in my view, there is no animal model for fibromyalgia. Now, I know that some people have an animal model for this aspect or that aspect or another aspect, but I believe in the primacy of clinical research.
Hmm,
And one of the heroes of our program are the more than 1,000 patients, or I guess just under 1,000 patients who participate in our studies at the high dose. But one of the challenges, no animal model, no molecular target. So it was very hard to do dose finding. And I think you remember that we did two trials, two potential pivotal trials at half the dose. And we felt we were close, but we established tolerability and we were just on the edge of consistent efficacy. And then when we doubled the dose to 5.6 milligrams, we got consistent efficacy.
right.
So that's a challenge. And I think generally one of the points you made, or at least I'm responding to one of the statements you made, was the world is different now. And a lot of innovative drug development goes on at smaller companies.
Hmm.
Back, in the era when I was in medical school and big pharmaceutical companies were still doing the bulk of drug development. Um, they have the resources to do, for example, two trials at once, whereas a
Hmm.
small company usually does, trials consecutively, one after the other, basically because you have to establish the hypothesis, raise more money, and do the second trial. So I think it's strengthened it out that you've drug development is the riskiest part of the pharmaceutical industry, and now it's been kind of relegated to also being in the riskiest asset class of pharmaceuticals, that you're kind of compounding the risk of development with the risk that a lot of companies have trouble with financing, as we did. I mean, I think you've followed our travails over the years, but I'll tell you, it's all worth it today. It's like it's all worth it in my view. Now, I
Yes.
did, could you go back to answer your question? I was catching up to some of the points that you raised that I thought were so interesting, but I'm not sure I answered your last question.
Well, no, I don't remember my last question.
Okay.
But
Oh, I do.
uh-huh,
I'm
uh-huh.
sorry. You said it's not really a new drug. Let me comment on that. Um,
Oh, Dan, could you
Possibly,
explain how the FDA sees this this reformulation? Do they see it as a brand new drug? Um,
sure. Well, let me tell you the history of this first, and then I'll
yes.
explain the regulatory framework the best I can. Um, I believe that swallowed cyclobenzaprine may have been the first medicine ever tested in fibromyalgia.
Mm.
And it was done in a large study that was sponsored in part by Merck. The paper is from 1994, and it was the first author is Carette, Carette. It was a 6-month study, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled
Wow.
study. And I'd be
Wow.
happy to send you, the link to this. Um, and and this was bedtime cyclobenzaprine swallowed, 20 milligrams per night. And at 1 month, there was a benefit, but the benefit was lost after 1 month. So it went back to there was no separation at 2 months, 3 months, all the way to 6 months. So based on that, the development of swallowed cyclobenzaprine was terminated. In other words, swallowed cyclobenzaprine doesn't work. Because if you have a chronic condition like fibromyalgia, the FDA requires a sustained or durable benefit at 3 months, because otherwise you're
Yeah.
treating a chronic condition. I'm sorry, go.
Could you explain why cyclobenzaprine was probably the first drug tested and why they thought it might be so helpful?
I wasn't there. I've
Huh?
spoken to Harvey about it. I'm sad that if Harvey was alive, he would have been delighted to have
Hmm?
had a segment on your show, on
Oh,
your media
yeah.
platform. A couple of things. First of all, cyclobenzaprine was developed originally by Merck Frost, which was the Canadian part of Merck. Second of all, it Harvey was from Toronto. And I don't know the exact origin of it, but cyclobenzaprine is chemically related to amitriptyline, which was a popular Merck antidepressant. But cyclobenzaprine had has swallowed cyclobenzaprine has significant tolerability issues relative to amitriptyline. And we have learned that's because it is much more water soluble. As a matter of fact, there's only one bond difference between amitriptyline and cyclobenzaprine, and yet cyclobenzaprine is 66,000 times more water soluble. So I think that that led to a problem with people tolerating it.
Mhm.
And one of the side effects of tricyclics generally, and of amitriptyline, and certainly of cyclobenzaprine, is drowsiness. So I think that someone somehow along the way, and there are a couple of people who worked on this, Pier Carlo Sarzi-Patini in Milan, and other people had very small studies looking at cyclobenzaprine, and somehow they got the idea that it might bedtime cyclobenzaprine might be helpful for sleep. But it was in my mind, and Harvey was modest. I think it was definitely related to Harvey's conception that this is a sleep disorder and looking for a way to address that aspect of the problem. So, if you will, I think the original idea was kind of taking a side effect of cyclobenzaprine, the somnolence that it induces, and turning that into a bedtime medicine to facilitate, well, I don't know about what facilitate restorative sleep, or at the very least, target non-restorative sleep. I think that was the original conception. And I think a lot of people looked at that data. Well, obviously, the company sponsor looked at the data and said, glass is half empty. They killed the program. I looked at that data and said, glass is half full. You've got an effect at 1 month. How can we re-engineer this to possibly make extend this signal and make it a durable effect? So, and that's what we did. So we recognized that a major metabolite of cyclobenzaprine called norcyclobenzaprine, which is a demethylated form, um, we believe that it interferes with the effect of cyclobenzaprine because when you swallow it, the norcyclobenzaprine accumulates over time. And norcyclobenzaprine is a pretty potent NRI, norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So the accumulation of a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor over time is probably going to be counterproductive in a drug that you're hoping to be a sleep promoting drug. So that was the basis of our design of a sublingual transmucosal form. And we believe that our product has met the design objectives in that, with chronic dosing, chronic bedtime dosing, we saw a durable separation of, reduced pain, drug versus placebo.
Well, I was surprised in the I think the latest study results to see that you didn't just find improvements in pain, you found improvements in sleep. You also found some improvements in fatigue. I mean, it wasn't like people were like out of pain, or their sleep was just miraculous, or they were suddenly full of energy, but they were substantial and clearly noticeable to the people who were taking them. That all these three different at least these three different things had factors had improved. What accounts for that? Is this still? Do you think it's the non-restorative sleep? And do you know if Tomnya
Tonmya.
Tonmya
Yeah.
do you know do you know if Tonmya does anything for the interrupted sleep that's apparently present in fibromyalgia?
Yeah, we our package insert, what people in the industry call our label, is now public.
Hmm.
And our the FDA label for our drug speaks to reducing pain, and
Hmm.
fibromyalgia is viewed as a pain condition, and the primary endpoint of our studies were pain. So our package insert is very similar in that regard to the drugs that went before it,
Right.
to Lyrica and Baltazevela. So those are not advantages that are on our label. That we have published the two uh, stat sig phase 3 studies, which were the basis of the efficacy results in our study. And doctors can look at those and draw their own conclusions. But we do hope over time that we can work with regulators and talk about how to get PROs, patient reported outcome measures for sleep quality and fatigue recognized by FDA as what FDA calls validated endpoints. So right now, they are not considered validated endpoints. So at this point, these are things for doctors to look at in a study and make their own conclusions, but we're not at the point yet where we can talk about
You
any of
can't
that
say
as
that.
being a real advantage. But it relates to something that you said before we were talking. I can't remember if this was before you started recording or not, but you did want to talk a little bit about chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is very important to that. So we, intend to work, deliberately, patiently, uh, with relevant stakeholders to try to um, make a case for particularly an endpoint called promise fatigue, which is not
Mhm.
recognized right now. And also to validate an endpoint, it has to be validated in a particular condition. So, for example, promise fatigue might be validated in some other condition, but FDA would need more information to consider it validated in our condition, in fibromyalgia. But we also think that this is part of the process towards getting a pathway for an approval of a chronic fatigue drug. Um, is is I think you can't have a positive study unless you have an agreed upon endpoint. So it can't go the other way around. So I think it'll be very important to win, acceptance of a validated endpoint. And I think if there was recognition that, for example, promise fatigue, and I'm just speculating, if chronic fatigue were to become a validated endpoint uh, for chronic fatigue syndrome, I think it would stimulate drug development in that area.
Well, isn't that what happened with fibromyalgia? That there was at some point there was I think you said at a meeting at some point the FDA recognized some validated symptom assessments, pain endpoints, and but we don't have that for chronic fatigue syndrome. So what is the process of getting the FDA to recognize that there is a validated endpoint that drug companies can assess their drugs? Um,
Yeah, well, let me tell you the history of fibromyalgia FDA really begins with Lee Simon, who is a rheumatologist. He was a professor at Boston, more than one place, but he spent 2 years at FDA as director of the pain division. At that time, I think it was actually pain and also had inflammation in it. But it was really, I believe it was 2002, 2003, that Lee Simon, as director of the division, applied, I'll call it regulatory genius and foresight in recognizing that, fibromyalgia was a chronic pain condition and that daily pain could be a primary endpoint for this. So he was the architect, in my view, of what happened in later in '07, '08, and '09 with the approvals of Lyricus, Cymbalta, and Savella. Um, and it was, after his leadership, Bob Rappaport did a great job, and then he was followed by Sharon Hertz. And anyway, there's been great leadership at the FDA Pain Division, but it really goes back to Lee Simon's vision, working with companies, because FDA mostly responds to what people bring them, what companies bring them.
mhm.
So I think that this story really begins in 2002, 2003. Um, so the process is, there's a division at FDA called COA. Some people call it DCOA, the Division of Clinical Outcome Assessments. And they work with companies that are called sponsors. If a company sponsors a drug, they will work with them and evaluate the data that they have supporting this, that, or the other endpoint. And the FDA is very interested in making progress in this. But again, they can't lead. They respond to what people bring them. So I'm hopeful that, we and maybe other companies might be, in the future bringing them data and to support the idea that some of these could be validated endpoints. By the way, there was recently a phenomenal report put out by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on chronic Lyme.
Mm,
It's only maybe came out maybe a month ago. I've been quite busy, so forgive me if my time is distorted. But one of the in this report, there's kind of a boxed section that talks about fibromyalgia as a paradigm for drug development in IACIs, is the term I believe they use, infection-associated chronic illness. So I think that I'm not the only one drawing attention to this really historic path that FDA worked with companies to develop, and which led to the first three fibromyalgia drugs. And we stand on the shoulders of giants. It was straightforward for us. We knew, working with the agency and agreeing on trial design and statistical methods and whatnot, always the agency is incredibly supportive and not supportive, I mean, doing their job, but
right, right.
open to bringing, new drugs to market, but to have the regulatory background and the precedents that decrease in daily pain, measured the way that we had measured it and by the previous sponsors would be considered a validated endpoint.
Great, 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 great. Well, it's great that there's a pathway forward that has been created. Um, so thank you, fibromyalgia and the chronic pain section of the FDA.
Yes.
Um, well, speaking of these three drugs, so I don't know if I can ask this or if you want to answer this, but how is Tomnya, Tomnya, Tomnya,
Tomnya,
Tom,
Tonmya, Tonmya.
how does Tomnya compare to these drugs? How is it different? How do you think it's better? What niches do you think it'll fill in the fibromyalgia community? Um, yeah, stuff like that.
Sure. So we do not have any comparative data. We don't have any head-to-head data. So I can't make any comparative statements in that regard. And as a matter of fact, our studies, our approval pathway was based on um, monotherapy, so our drug alone. And to the extent that people were, so they couldn't be on any of the other approved medicines.
Ah,
And in fact, if they were on um, one of the approved medicines and they wanted to participate in one of our studies, they would have to wash out. So, so I'm not only not not only can't I comment, I'm not able to comment because we don't have any direct information. But I can say that mechanistically, it's completely different and first in class. So Lyrica is considered a gabapentinoid. And I think that most people generally think of those as slowing nerve conduction. The two other drugs, Cymbalta and Savella, are both SNRIs, serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. And I think most experts in the field think that inhibiting norepinephrine reuptake um, leads to a, call it a repair of descending inhibition. There are about three negatives in that statement, but you write very intelligently about this, so maybe you can unravel that for your readers. But the
sure, sure.
idea is there's a concept of descending inhibition where the brain sends sends signals down to say, stop worrying about your hurting feet And in fibromyalgia, that descending inhibition doesn't work, but norepinephrine inhibitors tend to repair that somewhat. So that would be the second mechanism. And ours is unique because ours is, we call it specifically a tertiary amine tricyclic. So that's the class that we think is the appropriate name for our drug. And we are targeting the non-restorative sleep. So ours is a bedtime medicine taken once daily at bedtime, and taken over long periods of time. And our studies were 14-week studies. And we obviously the design of it that it's taken at bedtime, that our therapeutic concept was to target non-restorative sleep, and we have wound up with the data that led to this approval, says something, but all I can say about our drug is in fibromyalgia, it's a non-opioid analgesic, but it's centrally acting. So we believe it goes to the brain. And, but we have not, um, clinical research, you don't get to make the kind of definitive statements that people make in animal research or in labs. So, whether we've had an effect on non-restorative sleep or not is something that doctors can draw their own conclusions from the literature, but that's not in our label. So, but ours is, I'd say the two novel things about it are that it's a bedtime medicine and that it's a tertiary amine tricyclic.
Do you anticipate researchers doing studies to see what's happening during sleep? Do you know of anybody who's doing that?
Absolutely. We are so excited now that now with an approved drug, it is considerably uh, there are considerably fewer obstacles to doctors doing studies. Now, if they do studies, they obviously need to file an IND. Um, we are in discussions with some investigators about um, uh, working with them to facilitate these kind of studies. I don't have any announcements for you on that, but yeah, it's much easier to do mechanistic studies in fibromyalgia patients now that the drug is approved, as opposed to an experimental medicine, which has significantly more hurdles. So, for example, if someone is a professor at a medical school, wants to do mechanistic studies on how this affects sleep in fibromyalgia patients, the path is reduced in terms of getting IRB, Institutional Review Board, clearance and the other clearances they'd need. Obviously, anything outside of the indication of fibromyalgia would require an entirely new IND, investigational drug application.
Mm. How does the side effect profile of uh, Tomnya, Tomnya, Tomnya? I'm going to get it at some point. Tomnya.
Tonmya.
Okay, I think I got it. Tonmya.
Yeah, that's it.
Just like it's spelled.
Yeah.
How does
Right.
that compare to the three FDA approved drugs?
Again, we haven't done any head-to-head studies, so I can only
Uh-huh.
talk about it on its own. But on the label, there are two side effects that are, I would consider systemic side effects, um, uh, somnolence and fatigue. Somnolence means sleepiness, and fatigue is low energy. And on the
Hmm.
package insert, it says the incidence of those were 6% in treated patients versus 2% for somnolence, and 4% in treated patients for fatigue versus 2%. So those are the only two systemic side effects that are on listed, and the package insert is listed. It only shows things that occurred in 2% or more of either group. There are a number of other adverse events listed that relate to the mouth. One is called oral hyposthesia, which means kind of numbness, and some other things involving the mouth. And those are more related to administration site reactions because this is a sublingual tablet and it's designed to rapidly disintegrate under the tongue, dissolve, and release the medicine for transmucosal absorption. So, but but we only well we had what we think were good were encouraging levels of patient retention during the study. So we'll have to see how this pans out, in the real world.
Yes, yes, I think patient retention was quite good, and that is a that's a big problem is just keeping people on the drugs on the three FDA approved drugs. The side effects just from what I've read just are too much, and um, I think at least one study showed that people just didn't stay on them. Often did not stay on them for very long.
Yeah, I can't make any comparative studies because every study is different, and that's why, the FDA really, requires that comparative statements are based
Yeah,
on
yeah.
studies within a study. But I will say, from our market research, looking at claims data and things like that, it's clear that fibromyalgia patients cycle between medicines. So
Mm.
they go from one to another, to another, to another, to another, and that they have relatively low persistence on the approved drugs and other drugs.
Right.
But, instead of talking about the other approved drugs, I think the crisis in fibromyalgia right now is the use of unapproved medicines. I mean, when we in our
Mhm.
in a presentation that we put on our website on Monday when we had a conference call to discuss the FDA approval, we show a bar chart of what medicines patients are prescribed within 18 months of getting the diagnosis of fibromyalgia.
Oh,
And there were a couple of really surprising and disappointing things about it. One was that the extensive prescriptions of opiates, hydrocodone,
really? Even
yeah,
the really strong opiates.
yeah, and what's it?
Tramadol,
Hydrocodone. What's the other one?
Oxycontin,
Well, yeah, but the generic
tramadol,
name.
hydrocodone.
Yeah. And then also tramadol, which I consider it an opiate. I mean, it's a weak opiate, but it's an
Yeah,
opiate.
yeah, yeah.
So, and there was what we were struck by is the discrepancy between, on the one hand, the primary research we do with doctors, nurse practitioners, health HCPs, healthcare providers, some you call prescribers. Generally speaking, when you interview, we don't do it directly, but we pay firms to do primary research. When they've spoken to the prescribers are well aware of the risks of opiates in fibromyalgia and chronic pain, and they are also have good understanding that these drugs shouldn't be used. And there's some people, by the way, some experts believe that opiates actually can worsen fibromyalgia and chronic pain over time by kind
Over
of
time.
sensitizing
Yeah, yeah.
the pain system. So the discrepancy between what the HCPs know and what's happening in the market is really striking. That if you add them up, um, well, there are certainly more opiates prescribed than all of the FDA-approved drugs combined.
No kidding. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
So
Wow.
another thing that
They're
was,
really just flailing around, aren't they?
yeah, and I think it's hard because, with this, the patients are flailing, and I think the HCPs are flailing too. I think they'd like to have better medicines, and we hope to, provide them with one. One of the other things that was surprising is that gabapentin, which is generic Neurontin, is actually the most widely prescribed drug in this survey, even more than duloxetine. And gabapentin is not FDA approved. It's off-label. Not sure why it gets indicated so much, but it may be um, because people think it's similar to pregabalin, which is approved, and they're chemically similar. But pregabalin is FDA approved. That says something. I think the data supporting gabapentin are, questionable. Certainly it never got to the level that anyone took it to the FDA. So so you've got like the most widely prescribed medicine is not FDA approved, and then you've got all these opiates. It's not a pretty picture. So we're certainly hoping that that our drug first of all will bring more attention to the sector, and we certainly hope that uh, doctors will think about it with appropriate patients, as they are on their journey.
Yes. Well, I think, I mean, it seems like it can only be good news for the fibromyalgia drug sector that there's another drug that has been approved after all this time. Um, so what is next for you? So you've been approved. Now a whole new world opens up. Now you need to market the drug, you need to produce the drug, you need to educate doctors about the drug. I mean, this is a you kind of have to switch gears in a big way. Uh, so what is next, and when do you expect the drug to be available? Um,
Yes. So it's a big change for our company, but we've been planning for this. 2 years ago, in the summer of 2023, we acquired two FDA-approved prescription migraine products.
uh-huh.
We love the products, but we really bought them because we wanted to use those products to lay the foundation of a commercial organization. And they've been successful in that regard, that we have state licenses, contracts with payers, with it's called third-party logistics, with specialty pharmacies, all these kinds of things. So we already have, and we have approximately 10 sales reps already, even before the approval. But since we got the results of our second phase 3 study in December of 2023, and in parallel with preparing and filing the new drug application, we have been hiring commercial people to build out this organization. So we are in a position, we believe, to do the commercial launch ourselves. We are guiding that will happen in the fourth quarter of this year. But there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, first of all, labels have to be printed, bottles have to be filled, package inserts have to be put into bottles with so there's quite a lot that goes into, the manufacturing part, and there's quite a lot of work that's gone into the commercial planning and how we're going to do the outreach. So we have a phenomenal team of professionals who know how to do this. They've all done launches with other products, and they're very excited about the attributes of Tonmya and how it can fit in. There's some unusual aspects of the marketplace. One is that a lot of drugs um, are targeted to a subspecialty of physicians, and that's not the case with fibromyalgia. There are probably the biggest subspecialty represented in our research of high prescribers is rheumatology, which makes
Oh,
sense because rheumatology is the traditional home of fibromyalgia. As a matter of fact, in the 1600s, a French doctor described fibromyalgia, in my mind, in a way that has not changed and called it rheumatism. And fibromyalgia is still called rheumatism in Italy and other places. I don't know why in the United States that term has kind of fallen out of favor and considered non-specific. But I think that, a careful clinical description of rheumatism in the 1600s, including the sleep problems, exists till today. Um, so, but anyway, but rheumatologists have been at the, I mean, that's why I was mentioning that, because rheumatology, the term comes from rheumatism. So in my mind, fibromyalgia is the seminal, you know, what do you call it? When something's, there's some name for when something is named after the thing it is. It'll come to me. But
Right.
so,
Yes.
but I think that, fibromyalgia is incredibly important. Some people, I was a professor of rheumatology at Columbia for a number of years, so I know and that's where I first met fibromyalgia patients. So I think a lot of rheumatologists um, might say to one another, "Oh, I don't see fibromyalgia patients," or "I try not," whatever. In reality, every doctor sees fibromyalgia patients. And,
Sure.
I think that people have to wake up and realize that they should pay more attention and they should make the appropriate diagnosis when people have it. But
Yeah.
anyway, when you look at how we defined, doing this research, how you define fibromyalgia, it looks like the bulk of the high prescribers are actually general practitioners,
General practitioner.
so-called
Interesting. Interesting.
primary care physicians, PCPs, they call them in this kind of commercial research. So we've identified the high prescribing groups, and this is standard in the industry, and we're going to start by targeting them with materials, information, and whatnot, samples. We'll have a sampling effort, and hopefully that way we will get into the group of people that are already making the fibromyalgia diagnosis and already prescribing fibromyalgia drugs. And what we found is that if you take any doctor who's made the diagnosis of fibromyalgia in the past year and call them a fibromyalgia diagnosing doctor, 5% of that group write 70% of the prescriptions and make 70% of the diagnoses. So in our view, and this group 5% is about 25,000 prescribers. So it's actually a relatively small group of people that are very influential, and we think that they would be the potentially the early adopters.
Oh, great.
But
Uh-huh.
between that, only about 3 million fibromyalgia patients are diagnosed and treated in the United States, whereas the epidemiology speaks to 10 million people suffering with it. So at some point, after we get some traction with these high prescribers, we certainly want to branch out and, try to make inroads into this, larger population that is not currently diagnosed or treated.
Oh, it's amazing what a new drug can do, the impact it can have. So do you have any can you give us any information on costs, or what about insurance companies covering it? Will they tend to cover it once it's been approved, or do you know?
These are great questions. We have a very unique system in the United States where something like 90% of prescriptions are controlled by three vertical and horizontally integrated monopolies. So, we are just at the beginning of this. We have been providing information to it's, called the payers or managed care or PBMs, whatever you want to call this group. We have a team that we call our access team. They've been out in a formal process, engaging these groups and providing them information about the our value hypothesis, our thesis. Um, we're not there yet. It's interactive where, pricing is something that comes out from a lot of these exchanges. So we don't have information on that now, but, we hope to have it in the near future. But yeah, it's certainly our hope that at least some of these plans, will cover us, and that over time, when, as we show the value of the product in the marketplace, hopefully at some point showing reduced costs overall. I mean, reduced opiates,
Yes,
reduced
sure, sure.
hospitalizations, reduced ER visits. I mean, but it takes time to accumulate this real world evidence. So it's going to be a slog, but I think since you've already written about us, I think very in a complimentary way about the little engine that could. We're up to the task. We know it won't be easy, but we didn't get into developing a fibromyalgia drug because we thought it was going to be easy. So, we don't think this task will be easy, but we're gonna do everything we can uh, to make sure that patients can get access to it, because otherwise we're not going to have the impact that would justify all these years of work.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I know you got to go. So Tonix went through huge swings. You had high stock valuations, then you had that failed first trial because the dose wasn't quite right, and then the PTSD trial, you found a good dose, and then you had the trial during the pandemic, which, big trial, which nixed that. But then you looked at the figures and you retrenched, and meanwhile, the stock is just going blah. And I mean, so, so I guess two more questions. How did you guys make it through the troughs? And do you have any suggestions, advice for other small drug companies, because they do seem to be the ones that are most interested in ME/CFS and fibromyalgia, and they're willing to take the risks, and they feel like they have a unique product. Anything to say to them?
Yeah, all I can say is, stay strong. I mean, the system we have right now in the United States developing new products is quite unusual. As I said, when I was certainly an undergraduate, when I was in, a medical school resident, I mean, we had a system where we had these very well capitalized companies doing large studies, and it was, a career in a big company was a very organized existence where you could make decisions in a calm environment and fully capitalize. And now we have a system where you have to, build the house when you're living in it, and
Right.
you can't even afford to, you know, finish the house until you're halfway through. So I wish I could, I wish I had an ex uh, something to say about this system. Um, it's it doesn't seem organized in a way to tackle these hard problems optimally.
Mhm.
But all I can say is that we're lucky that we survived. I think the only reason why we survived is we have a phenomenal team. We have a phenomenal board of directors. We had phenomenal investors who, backed us up even in the worst times. Um, and but I think more than anything else, it was the belief in our product that
Yeah.
the signals that we had, and my CEO, I guess my belief is, you know, maybe more influential than other people's belief, but it's somewhat unique that I had this background in rheumatology and had a conviction about fibromyalgia, and I was guided by people like Harvey Moldofsky, that what we had, was so important. So there was an element of that we wouldn't take no for an answer.
Right.
Someone said it was, we just treated it like it was undeniable that we had to
Okay.
move
Yeah.
forward. So, well, fortunately, it all worked, and that we're on the other side of FDA approval, I guess. Um, uh, but yeah, it definitely, drug development is not for the faint of heart, or um,
I wonder if the fact that you're a small company helped. I wonder if a bigger company might have just dropped it. Does that
I once spoke to a director of a big company. This was when I was young and influent and impressionable. And he was a director of Merck. And
Mhm.
he told me that in his experience, and he had been a director, a long-serving director of Merck, and had been through many cycles, and even was there when it was a small company. I think he'd even been there when it was a private company. And he said, in all of his experiences, all of the programs that succeeded had one champion that drove it through.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
so I think that there has to be kind of a combination of one person, because even within these big companies, one person has to fight for resources and compete with other programs and things like that.
Right.
So I suppose if what he was saying was correct, and if I'm that person, I guess that I'm kind of too bashful to say it, but yeah, I've really believed in the problem of fibromyalgia, and I've believed, that we had an important potential solution.
Well, good. Well, when we're all the beneficiaries of that. Well, I have to ask what about, what about countries outside the US? Canada, UK, Europe? Um,
Those are great questions. And I will have to go in a second. We're very interested. There's a huge unmet need in Europe. Europe has zero approved fibromyalgia drugs.
oh, I didn't know.
None of the drugs were approved. They didn't have Lee Simon at their, at the EMA, although back in that was before everything got rolled in the EMA. But yeah, there's a huge need, and we'd love to work on that. And the day we started thinking about that was Monday, August 18th, because we couldn't take our eye off the ball in the United States. So we are, actively looking at Europe, also Asia. We're very interested in making this possible. It's I'd say it's more likely than not that those efforts would involve a partner, just because we're still a small company and we have to make this work in the United States. But we still probably have to spearhead the regulatory efforts, whether it's a partner or not. We have all the knowledge, all the expertise. But but fibromyalgia is clearly a worldwide problem. It is
Yes.
not a US problem. And it would be we would be very proud to make the drug available in other countries.
Very good. Well, let's hope. Let's hope.
Thank
Well,
you.
and thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Court. I really
congratulations again.
appreciate all that you
All
do
the,
for the field, and
uh-huh,
the
uh-huh.
the way that you're able to communicate. My hat is off to you, and I'm very grateful to you for your interest in speaking to me about our product and where we are. So thank you.
Oh, well, I am more than grateful as well. Thank you for spending
Yeah.
the time with with Little Health Rising. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All
Thanks,
right.
Court.